Welcome to Echo Prime YouTube channel. The hacker in seat 9A, the hum of the engines was steady, a comforting sound to most passengers. But to Chris Roberts, it was the heartbeat of a system waiting to be explored. Sitting quietly in seat 9A on a commercial flight from Denver to Chicago, Roberts didn't look like a threat. A hoodie, laptop bag, and calm expression, he blended in like any other frequent flyer. But beneath that calm exterior, his mind was tracing the invisible network of wires, code, and connections running through the aircraft. Chris wasn't a criminal, at least not in the traditional sense. He was a cybersecurity researcher, founder of a company called One World Labs, which specialized in identifying system vulnerabilities before malicious hackers could exploit them. For years, he had tested networks, breached databases, and exposed flaws that others couldn't see. But there was one network he couldn't stop thinking about: the sky itself. He knew that modern airplanes weren't just metal and engines. They were flying computers, with thousands of sensors, cables, and software systems communicating at lightning speed. The question that haunted him was simple. What if someone could hack an airplane the same way they hack a website? The curiosity that crossed the line. Chris had spent years talking to engineers, pilots, and even Boeing technicians. What he learned worried him. Many planes used internal systems that, in theory, could be connected, even indirectly, between the in-flight entertainment system, IFE, and the more sensitive control networks. If a hacker could move laterally through the system, it might be possible to reach deeper layers of the aircraft's operations. At first, it was theoretical, just conversations at conferences, private tests in simulated environments. But by 2011, curiosity pushed him further. On multiple flights, he began inspecting the hardware, hidden benches, passenger seats, small panels, and Ethernet ports used for maintenance access. When he realized that one of those could be connected to his laptop, he started experimenting. He later told the FBI that between 2011 and 2014, he had accessed the in-flight networks of several major airlines, always out of curiosity, not malice. But that line between curiosity and intrusion is razor thin. Every time he connected, he was technically breaching federal aviation systems. And on one flight, his curiosity may have gone too far. The tweet that started it all, on April 15, 2015, Chris Roberts was sitting on a United Airlines flight bound for Syracuse when he decided to send a tweet, one that would change his life forever. He wrote, half-jokingly, "Find myself on a 737-800. Let's see, box ice satcom, shall we? Could I start playing with EICAS messages?" To most of his 7,000 followers, it looked like harmless tech humor. But to airline security, it was an alarm bell. Within minutes of landing, FBI agents and airline officials were waiting for him at the gate. He was escorted off the plane, his laptop and hard drives seized. The FBI search warrant, later obtained by the press, stated that Roberts had admitted to hacking into airplane networks approximately 15 to 20 times. In one instance, he allegedly sent a command that caused one of the plane's engines to briefly shift thrust, creating a lateral or sideways movement of the aircraft. Roberts denied actually endangering any flight, claiming that any commands issued were done in a virtual environment or simulation mode. But the damage was done, and the US government wasn't taking any chances. When curiosity becomes a federal case, the incident exploded across headlines. Hacker claims he controlled airplane mid-flight. Cybersecurity expert says he took over jet engine with laptop. FBI investigates researcher who may have hacked a plane in the sky. To Roberts, it felt like his career was being twisted into a threat. For years, he had spoken at cybersecurity conferences, warning that airplane systems weren't as isolated as manufacturers claimed. He had begged companies like Boeing and Airbus to take cybersecurity seriously. Now, instead of being thanked, he was being investigated. The FBI affidavit confirmed that they were treating his claims as credible. They took possession of multiple hard drives, flash disks, and even a Cisco network switch from his home. For weeks, agents dissected his equipment, looking for proof that he had actually breached in-flight systems in real time. Meanwhile, the public split into two camps. Those who believed Roberts was a reckless hacker who risked lives, and those who saw him as a whistleblower, exposing flaws the industry wanted to ignore. Airlines fight back. United Airlines and Boeing issued firm denials. Their engineers insisted that flight control systems were physically isolated from passenger entertainment networks. The idea that someone could access the aircraft's flight controls from a seat port, they said, was impossible. But other experts weren't so sure. Independent cybersecurity specialists confirmed that while modern aircraft networks should be separated, there were still potential pathways through Wi-Fi systems, data buses, or maintenance networks, where poorly configured software could blur those lines. In short, Roberts may have stumbled on something real, even if he never took full control of a plane. The scariest part was not whether he had done it, but whether someone else could. The man, the myth, the hacker. To his supporters, Chris Roberts became a kind of folk hero. The hacker who shouted warnings before a catastrophe. To his critics, he was reckless, arrogant, and dangerous. He kept quiet for months after the investigation, consulting with lawyers and refusing to comment on what exactly had happened that day. But behind the scenes, a silent revolution was beginning. Aviation authorities quietly launched deeper cybersecurity reviews. The FAA began drafting guidelines for aircraft network protection, and the Department of Homeland Security started running tests to see if Roberts' claims could be replicated. For the first time, the government took seriously the possibility that a hacker could reach into the sky. From a laptop in row 9, the FBI, the black box, and the truth they didn't want to admit. When the plane touched down in Syracuse that April afternoon, Chris Roberts thought his biggest problem would be explaining a tweet. He didn't expect FBI agents to be waiting for him at the gate. 2 agents approached him calmly but firmly, asking him to come with them. Passengers stared as he was led away. No handcuffs, just quiet tension. But by the time he reached the terminal's security office, the tone had shifted. His laptop, hard drives, and USB sticks were all seized under a federal search warrant. The Bureau believed he might have hacked into a live aircraft, an act that, if proven, could be considered an act of terrorism under U.S. law. For a man who had spent years trying to prevent cyber attacks, the irony was brutal. He wasn't a terrorist. He was a researcher trying to expose weaknesses. But in the eyes of the government, he had crossed into dangerous territory, a gray area where curiosity and crime looked the same. The interrogation at the FBI field office. Chris sat in a small, sterile room under fluorescent lights. An agent laid down a stack of printed tweets, screenshots, and technical diagrams that looked like evidence from a sci-fi movie. "You said you sent a command to the airplane's engine system," the agent asked. "Did you?" Chris leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I was testing the theory," he said. "I didn't endanger anyone. It was simulated." But the FBI wasn't convinced. In their affidavit, they claimed that Roberts had exploited vulnerabilities in the in-flight entertainment systems of Boeing 737 and 757 aircraft, as well as Airbus A320s. They alleged he had connected his laptop via an Ethernet cable under his seat, and that, at least once, he issued a command to the thrust management computer, causing one of the engines to briefly change power. If true, it would mean Roberts had achieved something no one else had publicly done: bridged the gap between passenger systems and flight control. But Chris denied that any real-world command ever took effect. He insisted it was theoretical testing, performed through reverse engineering of system diagrams, not during live flights. A hacker's confession, the FBI's case, hinged on one key detail: Roberts' own words. Over the years, he'd been open about his work, sometimes too open. In security conferences, podcasts, and online chats, he'd discussed airplane vulnerabilities in technical terms. He even joked about them on Twitter. In one 2012 talk, he warned that entertainment systems might connect indirectly to flight data networks. Not designed that way, but patchwork systems tend to overlap. He urged airlines to fix the problem before someone malicious exploited it. But those same statements became ammunition for investigators. They combed through his social media, interviews, and conference presentations, piecing together what they called a pattern of unauthorized testing. Chris realized, too late, that his transparency, meant to spark awareness, had become his liability. The industry responds. While the FBI kept its case quiet, the aviation industry exploded with debate. Boeing and Airbus immediately released statements denying any possibility that entertainment systems could control aircraft. Boeing insisted its designs included air-gapped architecture, meaning flight control systems were completely isolated from passenger-accessible networks. But cybersecurity experts were divided. Robert Graham, a well-known researcher, said, "If Chris Roberts can even get near the avionics through the entertainment system, that's a design flaw." Others argued that while direct control was unlikely, certain data buses, like AirNC 429 or AFDX, could, in theory, share data points if improperly configured. In private, some engineers admitted that older aircraft, retrofitted with Wi-Fi and new entertainment systems, weren't as secure as the manufacturers claimed. Integrating new technology into decades-old wiring often introduced vulnerabilities no one anticipated. Chris wasn't trying to exploit that. He was trying to prove it. But proving it publicly, without permission, was exactly what made him a suspect. The court of public opinion. The media turned him into both a villain and a prophet. Headlines screamed, "The man who hacked a plane mid-flight." Cybersecurity expert grounded after taking over jet engine. FBI investigates researcher who could crash a plane from his seat. Chris's name trended on Twitter for days. News anchors debated whether he was a national threat or a misunderstood genius. On late-night talk shows, hosts joked about passengers hacking their flight paths to save on travel time. But behind the memes, Roberts' personal life crumbled. He was banned from flying United Airlines, his main travel carrier. Conference invitations were rescinded. His company, One World Labs, lost major clients overnight. "I tried to help them fix the holes," he told one journalist later. Instead, they burned the messenger. The investigation widens. The FBI didn't stop with Roberts' equipment. They subpoenaed data from airlines, Wi-Fi providers, and maintenance logs for flights he'd been on. Their goal: find any trace of irregular network activity matching his devices. They also reached out to Boeing engineers and the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, for technical analysis. Behind closed doors, DHS had already begun testing the vulnerabilities Roberts described, and according to leaked reports later obtained by Wired, some of his claims were valid. In simulated environments, researchers confirmed that in certain aircraft, data packets from passenger netWs, orcs could travel to more critical systems through shared routers or outdated protocols. It didn't mean a hacker could crash a plane, but it meant they could, in theory, send data where it shouldn't go. That finding changed everything. The turning point. By late 2015, the tone shifted. Roberts was no longer treated as a rogue hacker, but as an early warning. His work pushed both airlines and the government to confront uncomfortable truths about aviation cybersecurity. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, quietly started new testing programs. The Government Accountability Office, GAO, issued a public report acknowledging that modern aircraft may face increased cybersecurity risks due to connectivity. In short, the very thing Chris Roberts had been saying for years was finally being taken seriously. Still, the damage to his reputation was done. The FBI never filed formal criminal charges, but they kept his devices for months, and his travel restrictions lingered. In interviews, Roberts sounded tired, disillusioned. "I wanted to help," he said, "but sometimes shining a light gets you burned." The hacker who made the sky safer. By the end of 2016, aviation companies began rolling out new cybersecurity layers: firewall reinforcements, stricter Wi-Fi separation, and encrypted maintenance ports. Chris Roberts' name was never officially credited, but insiders knew. His ordeal had forced the system to change. He returned to speaking at conferences, still warning about the risks of complacency. "Hackers don't care about your fear," he said. "They care about your mistakes." In time, the FBI moved on to new cases, but the question Roberts raised still hangs in the air. If a laptop could touch the edge of an airplane's brain, even for a second, what else can be reached from the ground? The skies were safer, but only because one man dared to test them. The fallout, the future, and the hacker who changed the sky. The world had moved on, but Chris Roberts hadn't. Long after the headlines faded and the tweets were buried under new scandals, he was still fighting the shadow his own curiosity had cast. In public, he'd become a symbol, either the reckless hacker who almost brought down a plane, or the fearless whistleblower who forced an industry to wake up. In truth, he was neither. He was just a man who wanted the truth to matter. The man behind the laptop. After the FBI raid, Roberts had returned home to Denver with an empty office and a shattered reputation. His company, One World Labs, which once specialized in identifying cybersecurity vulnerabilities for global clients, was teetering on collapse. Major corporations had cut ties, fearing association with a federal investigation. He could no longer travel freely for work, and the speaking engagements that once paid his bills had dried up overnight. But what hurt him most wasn't the financial loss. It was how easily his message had been twisted. For years, Roberts had warned that connectivity without security was a ticking time bomb. He wasn't alone. Other ethical hackers echoed his concerns, but none had gone as far as connecting a laptop to an aircraft in flight. In interviews after the case, he often said, "We can't fix what we refuse to admit is broken." He never wanted to be the villain in a federal affidavit. He wanted to be the guy who helped fix what no one else could see. The system strikes back. By 2016, Chris had become something of an underground legend. Hackers admired his bravery. Corporations whispered his name with caution. But the government's reaction had sent a message that echoed across the cybersecurity community. Testing real-world systems without permission even with good intentions, could destroy your life. Several ethical hackers, who once specialized in physical infrastructure, airports, hospitals, even power grids, quietly pulled back. The fear of prosecution was real. Chris had become the case study of what happens when you test too far. The irony was that his work had spurred the very changes the government later praised. That same year, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, launched joint initiatives focused on aviation cybersecurity resilience. Boeing, Airbus, and even the U.S. Air Force began to work with ethical hackers under tightly controlled programs known as Red Team assessments. These programs simulated what Roberts had done, but now it was sanctioned, funded, and applauded. He'd broken the rule book, and in doing so, he'd forced them to rewrite it. The reports they couldn't ignore. In 2016, the Government Accountability Office, GAO, released a public report that validated much of what Chris Roberts had been saying all along. It stated, "Modern aircraft are increasingly connected to the internet. This interconnectedness may provide unauthorized remote access to aircraft avionics systems." It was the first time a government report acknowledged that planes were not invincible to cyber threats. The GAO urged the FAA to develop stronger cybersecurity standards for aircraft design, maintenance, and network integration. The media barely noticed, but within the cybersecurity world, this was monumental. Roberts's warnings, once dismissed as paranoia, had been proven legitimate. He had been right. Still, his personal vindication came quietly. The FBI never officially cleared him, but no charges were ever filed. The evidence, while alarming, didn't prove he'd endangered any lives. What it did prove was far more important. Aviation cybersecurity was dangerously behind the times. Rebuilding a reputation over time, Roberts reemerged as a sought-after speaker, not because of what he did, but because of what he endured. At conferences, he talked about ethics, responsibility, and curiosity, the same forces that once put him under FBI watch. His talks were raw, honest, and often humorous. He called himself the idiot who plugged a laptop into a plane, and the crowd laughed. But beneath that laugh was a warning. In one of his most famous speeches, Roberts said, "We love to talk about hackers as threats, but the biggest threat is pretending systems are secure when they're not. Hackers don't crash planes. Denial does." The industry was finally listening. By 2019, cybersecurity became a mandatory part of new aircraft certification processes. Engineers and ethical hackers collaborated under controlled programs, a balance of innovation and caution that might never have existed if not for that fateful tweet. The legacy of a modern-day Icarus. Today, when cybersecurity experts mention Chris Roberts, they do so with a mix of awe and caution. He's the man who proved curiosity could shake an empire. The man who forced billion-dollar companies and federal agencies to face a truth they didn't want to see. But also, the man who paid the price for being right too soon. In aviation history, no crash has ever been linked to a cyber attack. But every major airline now includes cybersecurity briefings in its operational training. New planes are built with hardware-enforced network isolation, a safeguard directly inspired by the vulnerabilities Roberts warned about. He didn't hack a plane to cause chaos. He hacked the system to make it safer. The Sky, rewired in 2022, years after his ordeal, Roberts was invited to consult for several aerospace cybersecurity projects. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same institutions that once investigated him now Juan, Ted his expertise. He accepted quietly. He never gloated, never said, "I told you so." Instead, he focused on teaching the next generation of researchers how to navigate the thin line between curiosity and compliance. He often told young hackers, "Test the limits, but get permission first. Curiosity is powerful, but without ethics, it's a loaded weapon." Through that message, he turned his mistakes into lessons. His story became a cautionary tale, not of danger, but of integrity. Epilogue: The hacker who made the sky safer. Chris Roberts still lives in Colorado, spending more time hiking than hacking these days. His social media is quieter, his tone more measured. Yet, every so often, he drops a reminder that he's still watching the digital skies. He never set out to be famous. He set out to make systems stronger, safer, and in that, he succeeded. The aviation industry is more secure today, not because of compliance checklists or corporate promises, but because one man dared to connect his laptop to a mystery no one wanted to explore. They called him reckless. They called him a criminal. But history may remember him as something else entirely. The hacker who made the sky safer for everyone.